recording available. If at any stage anyone has any questions, please just use the raise a hand function or just visibly raise a hand at any stage if you're confused about anything. And you can use the chat as well if you have a question or you weren't quite clear about something. Appreciating that some people have children or may need to use the bathroom, etc. You can turn your camera on and off, and I won't be bothered. So just feel free to do that if things arise. And what I was going to suggest is that if you can leave yourself unmuted, as in if you're in a reasonably quiet environment, that's absolutely fine. But obviously if there's dogs around or children around or you think you might be distracted, then leave yourself on mute. But it might be nice because I might just ask for feedback kind of spontaneously from time to time, just to see how you're getting on with a particular exercise. So what I'd like to start with is just a question. So the question is, and you can write this down if you like, if you have a piece of paper to write on, is what percentage of the time would you say that you are aware of the space that you're in? So yeah, and I won't interpret, you can interpret the question as you wish. So what percentage of the time do you think you're quite present to the immediate space that you're in? And we'll see how that goes. You might feel different towards the end of this session and perhaps in the following sessions as well. So I was going to begin by just kind of waking up our 3D awareness. And if you can stand up, if you can't stand up, that's fine as well. And what I'd like you to do is, I'd like you to first of all, just bring your hand to the top of your head. And maybe lightly rub or tap the top of your head. And as your hand is there, just get a sense of the space between the top of your head and where your feet are making contact with the ground just now. And just asking yourself the question, is the space between where my hand is and where my feet are what I would expect it to be, or is it slightly longer or shorter than I would expect it to be? And just from there, I'd like you to bring your hand down, or maybe both hands, just see if you can lightly, very, very lightly tap or rub your forehead. And then making your way slowly around the contours of your head. To the sides. And just gradually around to the back of your head. And just then returning back to the front. Noticing if, for want of better words, if that does anything for you. So if you feel perhaps a little bit more three-dimensional, just doing that. And bring your hands down again. And again, just noticing what's it like to stand right now, having done that, whether there's kind of an after effect of that tapping or rubbing. And you can take a look around the room and just acknowledging yourself in this space right now. And now I'd like you to maybe just around your mid-tummy area, and just do something similar. So just beginning at the front, just tap that area out. Gradually going around, so you're tapping the front, going around the contours to the sides, and then gradually tapping at the back. Just seeing if that wakes up anything for you. And finally, just with your thighs, just bring your hands down to your thighs. You may need to go into a slight bend, tapping the front of your thighs, sides, and around the back. And then just returning to where you started. And I might just ask Rafe, perhaps, if that does, if you notice anything change, or maybe just a subtle change in terms of the before and after having done that little activity.
It made me realise I'd had quite a big lunch.
Okay. Yeah.
It's always quite surprising to me to touch the top of my head. I think that was probably the most powerful thing. I think because if I don't have an idea where my head is, I think my height might be indeterminate.
Yeah.
And sort of taking the whole of the sky almost, so which I'm not sure is a particularly helpful thing to think. So to be reminded of where the top of my head is quite.
Yeah. No, thank you, Rafe. It's really interesting to, I guess, acknowledge where your boundary is. So where the boundary of your physical self is and the space around you. And the top of your head does often wake oneself up to how tall you actually are. And you don't need to be 7 foot just to have that kind of bodily sense that there is quite a bit of space between the top of your head and the soles of your feet. So I'm going to ask people to sit down now, and we're just going to do another little waking up exercise. So what I'd like you to do is just really gently place a hand on your forehead. And again, at the least amount of effort possible, raise your other hand to just gently rest on the back of your head. And just being there, see if you can just really, so your hands are going to move your head with just the slightest nod. So you're just going to be nodding slightly forward, slightly back. And you can get a sense that your whole head is nodding. So the contours of your head, the shape of your head, it's all included in that nodding process. And then gently bringing one arm off and noticing how your arm floats through space around you as you bring your other arm off. And as you bring your hands off, just noticing the kind of memory of that contact on your head. So you might just have a sense that that area of your head is maybe a little bit more sensitive since your hands were there. And next, just bring a hand to your chest, thereabouts. And then again, very gently, just in your own time, bring another hand back to in between your kidneys, just around your back. So a little lower than the front hand. And just noticing that front to back dimension that you have. And what you might notice is that you might notice some movement at the front. And you might notice even more movement at the back. For some people, it will be more, and others it will be less. And then just lowering the lower hand to your lower abdomen, and lowering the backhand to just your lower back, just over your tailbone. And once again, just getting a sense of your depth from front to back in that area. And once again, you might notice some movement at the front and maybe even at the back. So you might notice the subtle movement of your breath in that area. And just bring your hands back to neutral position. And just noticing if you can feel the after effect of those hands in those places again. So if you feel perhaps a little bit more alive in that dimension of front and back throughout your torso. And so next, what I'd like you to do, so for some of you this will be quite familiar and for others it will be new. So if you can, if you're on a reasonably hard surface, if you can just bring one hand and then the other hand underneath where you're sitting. So if I show you, so it would be just be bringing one hand underneath one side of your bum and the other hand on the other side of your bum. And you'll notice that the bones of your bum, that area, is going to be exerting a pressure on your hands. So you're not going to stay there for too long. You can take one hand out and the other hand out. And once again, just noticing if you sense the after effect of having had your hands there. So you might feel that support of the seat, perhaps 10% more. And so next, what I'd like you to do is, I'd like you to bring your fingers up to the kind of bony prominences behind your ears, and just to kind of at the base of your skull. Yeah. So they're just going to be ideally kind of under those bones, to the side, but kind of slightly under those bones. And I'd like you to just get a sense of where your hands were just a moment ago beneath your, what we call sit bones, or those bony parts that you were sitting on. And just noticing the space between that contact point with the seat and where your fingers are now. And from here, if you can just, once again, just really gently nod your head up and down. And you can take your hands away. And you can continue that really, really gentle nodding movement. So you're talking just a few degrees, maybe 5 degrees up and down. So I'm just going to pause for a moment, and I might ask Audrey just if you have any reflections on the last, I guess, 5 to 10 minutes. If anything struck you as anything struck you.
Feeling a little bit bigger than I was. I'm feeling I'm taking up more space. I've also noticed I've got a real pull in that shoulder that I need to sort out. I don't know what I've been doing. There's a certain unevenness that already that's probably starting to relieve itself through that awareness. But certainly, yes, I'm feeling almost too as though my insides have got more space to be. It's certainly feeling it in there, right in all the internal organs.
Yeah, lovely. Yeah, thank you. So what I'd like you to do, so just in terms of some basic body mapping, so where you had your fingers there approximate to where the head sits upon the spine. So obviously it's going to be deeper in from that point. So that nodding movement is quite an accurate kind of indicator of the head just moving gently on its pivot point on the spine. And where you had your hands earlier are a good indicator of where your spine come pelvis end. So your spine and pelvis function as one unit. And you can experiment with this, so you can kind of prove it for yourself. If you go into a little slump in your lower back, can you notice how your seat bones, those bony prominences, are now making a different contact with the chair underneath you? And similarly, if you bring yourself back into, I guess, just a nice kind of more balanced place on those sit bones, you can notice that your spine has to change in order to regain that balance. And then if you take it in the other direction, if you kind of do the classic kind of trying to sit up straight posture, if you kind of pull yourself up, you'll notice that your lower back goes in and your sit bones are making less contact with the seat underneath you now. So, and then just returning to a more balanced place. So it's really interesting to, I guess, acknowledge that your spine and pelvis function as one unit, and that kind of spine pelvis functioning unit runs all the way from up here to down here. And then kind of if even just acknowledging that and finding balance on your sit bones and your head on your spine can give you the sense, kind of what Audrey described, that there's just a little bit more room for expansion for your organs, but also in three-dimensional space, into the space around you. And one last little bit of kind of body mapping, or just to bring this exercise a little bit further. If I ask everybody to just, what I'd like you to do is tuck your head a little bit forward and a little bit down. So I'm kind of doing it there in an exaggerated way. And just notice what that feels like in terms of, yeah, how it feels physically, how it feels emotionally, and how it feels in terms of you and your relationship to what's around you. So don't stay there for too long, because if it's anything like my experience, it's a little bit uncomfortable. And just bring yourself back into balance. If you wish, you can bring your fingers up here again and just take a gentle nod. And similarly, so if that's bringing your head kind of forward and down, I'd like you to just once again kind of do that soldier pose. So you're going to kind of forcibly push your head upwards. And just notice the kind of feeling in your perhaps upper back, your neck. But also notice the change that occurs in your breathing and your relationship with your surroundings. And then you can just come back into a more neutral place. So just, again, without putting your hands there, just rediscovering your sit bones and that contact, and rediscovering that sense of your head just lightly balancing and releasing off the spine. Welcome, Sarika, as well.
Thank you.
Maybe Padraig, if you had just a few words, any kind of reflections on that, those last few minutes, maybe just discovering the seat bones and the balance of the head.
Well, yeah, in discovering them and then going out of that balance, it is. I found it a lot more uncomfortable, especially head going forward and down. It made me, my breathing was constricted a little bit more, and yeah, it wasn't a pleasant experience.
Yeah.
I mean,
and I guess we're in this kind of exercise, we're obviously taking it to an extreme, but I don't know if you can kind of recognize that pulling your head forward and down is quite familiar if, for example, you're typing on a typewriter or texting a friend or even having coffee over the dinner table. That we can kind of do that in a subconscious way in different activities. And maybe in the week ahead, if you recognize that you're doing that in a certain activity, you can use this as a little practice to bring yourself back into balance. Particularly around computer screens, that's kind of the classic one, where it can kind of seem like there's like a magnetic pull that the computer screen is exerting on you, bringing you into the screen almost. So you can kind of stay back in yourself and in balance. So what I'd like to do now is talk you through a spatial awareness exercise. And this is going to be about discovering kind of the different spatial dimensions. So if you can, you can stay in that nice balanced place. If you're tiring, obviously use the support of a chair. I would like you to keep your eyes open for this. It might be tempting to close your eyes at some stage, but if you can keep your eyes open, and also I'll also be encouraging you to not only keep your eyes open, but keep engaged with what you see. So to begin with, we can simply take our eyes for a walk around the room right now. And just noticing what you can see directly in front of you. So you'll notice objects, you'll notice colors, and you'll notice textures. And there may be some things that you're more curious about, some things you're less curious about. And just noticing that as your eyes move around the room, that every little movement of your eyes brings a different image to you. So you don't need to make any effort to see what you're seeing right now. And you can notice the space between you and what you're seeing. And you can notice the front of your body. So you can notice the space between your eyes and what you see. But you can also notice the space between, for example, your chest and what you see, or your lower abdomen and what you see. And kind of similar to where we had our hands earlier. And you can perhaps notice the front of your knees. And you can notice the front of your foot and your toes. And if you have a window, you might be able to see that there's space beyond what you see. And even if you don't have a window, you can just acknowledge that there's space beyond the wall that you can see. And perhaps you can just imagine the space beyond that wall. You can imagine a few feet beyond that wall into the next room or outside. Or you can even imagine a mile beyond that wall or that window. So just for right now, you're just becoming very aware that there is this abundance of space directly in front of you. And you can both see it, but you can also sense it. And keeping your eyes still open and looking out in front of you, being curious about what you see. I'd like you to just now become aware of the space that is behind you. So you might have a sense of the space that's behind you in the room that you're in. And you might have a sense that there's space beyond that as well. So maybe there's a room, another room behind you. Or there might be outdoor space behind you. And what's it like to be looking ahead and noticing the objects that you see, but being also aware of the space that's behind you? Very often we're drawn into what's in front of us, but at any given moment, half of the universe or the world is actually behind us. And just notice if that changes anything in your breathing or in your kind of general just body sense of feeling, allowing that space behind you to be acknowledged a little bit more fully. And remembering where our hands were earlier on, so on the front and the back of the head, and the front and back of the torso. So seeing if you can be kind of aware of the front and back of your body. And in an effortless way, without making any effort or putting any pressure on yourself, also including the space that is in front of you and behind you. And you may also notice just in that recognition of the space, you may notice that there's either some silence around you or there might be some peripheral noises also. And now I'd like you to bring your attention to the top of your head. And just noticing if anything kind of shifted in terms of how you're feeling as you bring your attention more acutely to the top of your head. Also noticing if your eyes changed, and if they did, just encouraging you to look out in front of you again. So engaging with what you can see. And whilst looking out in front of you, bring your attention to the space that's just about an inch or two above your head. So you're just allowing your attention to move up there. And now maybe a foot or two above your head. And without having to look, just noticing the space between the top of your head and the ceiling of the room that you're in. And allowing your attention to be elevated further to the space that is perhaps in the room above you, or if there's no room above you, then perhaps the attic, or just imagining that there is kind of the dimensions of another room above you. And what's it like to bring your attention to the imagined space that is a mile above your head? So just acknowledging that there is space and lots of it, a mile above your head. And if you can, in that awareness, allow yourself to still look out in front of you. So you're still just seeing what is directly in front of you and allowing your eyes to move. And finally, just allowing your attention to move upwards again to the sky or the furthest possible place that you can imagine above you. And again, just doing this in an effortless way. You're just seeing what it's like, just as an experiment. And I'd like you to bring your attention now back to yourself. And just checking in with yourself, seeing if you still have a sense of you being here in the room that you're in, or the space that you're in. And noticing the contact of your feet with the ground underneath you. And the contact of the chair. And if you can get a sense that having done that kind of experiment of bringing your attention upwards, if you can have a sense that the floor underneath you and the chair underneath you are supporting you upwards. And keeping your eyes looking out in front of you, seeing if you can have a sense of the space that is both to the left and to the right of you. And you can have a thought with your eyes that they can simply and gently move to the left and to the right, away from the bridge of your nose. And you might notice that you see more of your periphery, or that what you see has gone slightly fuzzy. And you might be aware of the wall to the left of you and the wall to the right of you. And just the space between you and those walls of the room that you're in. And you can notice the sides of your body. And you might notice the breath moving the sides of your body also. And again, just acknowledging that beyond the walls to the left and to the right of you, that there's space beyond those also. So there might be another room or another house, or there might be outdoor space. Just having that sense that there is lots of space to the left and to the right of you. And if you can engage visually again and maybe choosing something to look at, some simple everyday object. And as you look at that object, see if you can just notice that there's space to the left and to the right of that object, or that there's space around that object in 3 dimensions. So there's space behind it, space between you and what you're looking at, and the space above and below it. So I might just bring this exploration to a close and ask Nick, perhaps, if you had any kind of comments or reflections on how that was for you, what changed within you as you engaged with that.
I had a moment of everything sort of falling away into this just perfect stillness, just, I don't know, for want of a better expression. My mind's, you know, there's fear stuff, but suddenly it just all aligned into something really pure.
Thank you for sharing. So often space and stillness go together. So when we bring our attention more acutely into the space that we're in, a sense of stillness can kind of accompany that. So thank you for sharing. I'm just going to check something. So what I was going to suggest for now is that if we're able to go into breakout rooms for probably about 6 to 7 minutes, that would be really great. And if we have groups of 3, we'll probably have about 3 groups of 3. And if Patrick, if you were able to put me, you, and Rafe in 3 rooms with 2 others, that would be ideal. In 3 separate rooms with 2 other people. What I'd just maybe be curious to discuss would be just what you got from those exercises, and maybe going back to that first question of what percentage of the time you're aware of the space around you. So maybe thinking about and discussing how you would like to, what suggestions you're going to take from these practices into the week or weeks ahead of you that you're going to play around with to maybe encourage you to be a little bit more present to the space that you're in. So to rephrase that question more simply, what is it that you'd like to do in the week ahead that will help you be more in the space that you're directly in? And it may be from these exercises or it may be from something else. And so everybody can speak maybe for about 2 minutes each, but you can also just chat if that feels easier for you. So if we meet back here at just before 10 to, again, Patrick, if you'd be able to orchestrate that, that would be wonderful. And just to say, I guess before we do that, not everybody knows each other here, but I know everybody here, and everybody is really lovely, and you're a bunch of lovely people. So don't feel hesitant about sharing openly about how that was for you. And also, if that didn't do much for you, don't be afraid to share that as well. So just speak openly and honestly about how things were for you. Great.
Hello.
Hello.
Put my glasses on. Hello, Taylor.
Hi there. There's Patrick as well.
Hi, Patrick.
You're on mute there, Patrick. I don't know if you're intentionally on mute.
Yeah.
Yeah. I can say a couple of things. First off, I don't know if you're here. Is it please tell me how to pronounce
My
your
name is Susie, actually.
Lucy, okay. That's easier. I don't know if you were here just at the start, but Brian kind of asked he posed the question, what percentage of the time do you feel like you're aware of the space around you? And I kind of had a sense it was low for me to start, but I was kind of like, I don't know, like 5-10%, something like that. But then after doing that, I think it's even lower, because when he asked to like take like a kind of let your eyes travel around the room, I was noticing how my eyes were kind of flitting from object to object. And then suddenly there was a subtle shift where I noticed like the majority of the room I'm in is actually blank wall. That's the space that I'm in. It's like empty wall, and I'm so tuned in to the objects in the space as opposed to like the majority of, yeah, it's just emptiness. So that was kind of interesting realization. Yeah. How is that for you, Patrick or Lucy?
Can't hear.
I can't hear you, Patrick, for some reason. You type.
Mm.
I guess I'll say one more thing. I noticed, I don't know if it's like kind of a muscle that needs training, but I found it sometimes difficult to jump from like one suggestion to the next. Like sometimes I was just about feeling ready or just about feeling able to kind of be aware of something in front of me or the space between me and an object. But then I didn't feel like I could kind of hold on to that simultaneously whilst being aware of something else. Like it felt like I kind of struggling to kind of expand beyond certain focus points.
Mm. So I'll go, so in case Patrick doesn't get to come. What machine are you on, Pat? We can't get. Oh, we've got the chat to hear you. What is... Oh, yeah. Guess it must be the settings of your sound or something. Mm. I notice that every time I speak or somebody speaks, I go like this. And in my normal life, I find myself very constantly pulling myself back because I had a massage recently and the lady said, you know, because I'm like in my 70s, and she said, you haven't got the normal bump here. And I said, I didn't want that bump. So I've done minimal, I keep going like this so that I don't get that bump. So yeah, the spacious thing was, I think it would take quite a lot to get used to if I was interacting with someone else. But I can see that it could really become something, well, it really kept me in the present moment. So if I can have a sense of that spaciousness and interact with other people, I think I'd have more of my faculties available to me. you know, in the present moment.
Hmm.
Are you with us, Patrick? Can we hear you?
I think he can hear us, but I think
Yeah, he can hear us. Yeah.
yeah. In some ways, it was helpful. Brian was moving quite quickly with his suggestions because I did notice mind activity coming in and distracting me as well. So, yeah, it would be.
Perhaps I'm back, am I?
Oh, there
Yes.
you
Here you are. Hello.
I was doing something. It's my fault. Something I was doing earlier in the day. Oh, one thing I know, I'm kind of struggling with. I find it really challenging actually to look around the room and really take things in. I've just moved into a new place, so I'm still kind of relating to it. So it's quite a strong thing to really sort of occupy it, and even to look out of the window and see the context of the place that I'm in. I think psychologically I'm finding it quite strong. One thing I really noticed sort of more or less physically is as I've managed to imagine the world beyond what I could see into the horizon, I noticed myself just sort of releasing backwards, which I thought was interesting. It's like just the idea of an imaginary distant horizon seemed to sort of, I found myself kind of releasing backwards. I think that was the biggest thing I noticed. Apart from my kind of unease really of finding myself in the place that I am. But I feel much more like a whole person as well. It's quite interesting, but also unsettling. That's how it's been for me.
Hmm. I felt quite a shift when, yeah, at the start when we were looking at objects, and then the suggestion was, I think Brian said something about being effortless, but also letting the image come to you. That felt like a really different way to kind of, like I felt, as you said, kind of a releasing backwards. Suddenly I felt like, yeah, this kind of subtle shift away from whatever I was seeing. That was really quite noticeable difference.
Yeah, it's like you don't have to sort of go towards the thing you're looking at in order to see it.
And prevent, Lucy, I'm going to be now conscious of preventing that. Oh, geez. Oh, it's me. Oh, Patrick, I think Brian's ready for us to go back.
That's handy, you can come to the room, isn't it?
I have him in the other room. Okay.
Yeah, so I think there's a bit of a delay before before people rejoin, maybe.
So what I was going to suggest is, so that was, we had a really lovely discussion in our group, and I'm just going to make one point from that. So Nick mentioned how, kind of in relation to the question I first asked, like how aware are you of the space that you're in, generally speaking, what percentage of the time, that there's kind of different levels of that. So like on one level, we're always aware that we're in a particular room, but we can become more kind of acutely aware of where we are and the objects in the space and the relationship we have with those objects, the space between us and the objects, so the space between the objects that we see. So what I'd like people to do now, because we're just coming up to closure, is if you can just take 1 or 2 minutes just to jot down a couple of things that you took from the session. And it might just be 1 or 2 words, or it might be 1 or 2 sentences. And as a suggestion, while you're writing, see what's the least amount of effort that you need to do to actually write what you're writing now. So I'm going to finish up shortly. I might just ask briefly, Susie, just because I haven't heard from you, any kind of comments on any of those exercises? I know that you missed maybe the first 10 minutes or so, but
I missed the first bit, but Taylor said you'd asked a question, so I had more. Yeah, well, the words I've written at the end just now are space equals time. And I think having that spatial awareness is very makes one very present.
Yeah.
Even though at the beginning, I think it might be, if I'm interacting with another person, it's 2 things to do, but they will become nothing to do at one point, I'd say. Or it happens naturally, let's say.
Yeah, great, thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, certainly there can be a sense of things slowing down as we become more spatial aware. And it is possible with people with interactions, but perhaps takes a bit more practice, and we'll come back to that in other sessions. Vanessa, just briefly, maybe a word or 2.
Yeah, just to remember, I think thinking about the sit bones is really helpful to me. And then also the space, doing the sit bones combined with the space between the objects seemed to work together for me.
Yeah, great, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, before I discovered the sit bones, such a simple thing, but before I discovered that kind of balance on the sit bones, I found it really hard to sit comfortably in a particular place for a long period of time. And it's a balancing act, and you can experiment, because you can go a few degrees in any 3 dimension. You can go a few degrees to the left and to the right, and it's reasonably comfortable. But again, if you go to one extreme or the other, so if you cross your legs and lean forward, you'll notice the lack of contact and the kind of lack of sense of support that you that's present, the more you go off that support. So thank you. And Robin?
Well, I was thinking about the percentage at the beginning. At the beginning, I said I thought I was about 50% aware of the space around me. And at the end, I said I thought it was more like, prior to this, I was about 20% aware of the space around me, because doing the exercise made me expand my notion of what it is to be in that space, to reside within the space and be aware of it. So I downgraded myself prior to this. I did, in my small group, realize that a lot of the people in here have done some of these exercises before, but it's the first time for me, other than general mindfulness classes. And so, yeah, I thought I was much more aware of how unaware I am.
Thank you. Thank you for your honesty. Finally, Patrick, I don't think we've heard from you yet.
Yeah, I was really noticing I feel like a more complete person altogether. Particularly, I've got my legs. I seem to have legs and feet in the way that didn't seem to be there before somehow. It's a bit unsettling, actually. I feel slightly unsettled as well, but definitely more connected with myself and the world I'm in. Yeah.
Thank you, Patrick. Okay, so I'm going to leave it there for now. Thanks everybody for joining me. I think I have all your email addresses. I mightn't have yours, Susie, so I think that you can contact me through Facebook Messenger if you just message me your email address, and you can expect to take an email from me shortly. And otherwise, hope to see most of you next week if you're able to make it.
Thanks, Brian.
Thank you.
Yeah. Cheers,
Thanks
everyone.
so much.
Thanks very much.
Thanks,
Bye.
everyone. Thanks, Brian. Bye.
Bye. Bye.
Bye.